Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Kevin from China. Today, I would like to share some tips for learning Chinese. Last week, my friend from Canada asked if there were any shortcuts to learning Chinese. This prompted me to think about the differences between Chinese and English and how my mind works when I speak Chinese. I found that vocabulary and pronunciation are not the core differences for two reasons. First, 99% of Chinese vocabulary has corresponding English vocabulary. Second, China has various dialects, and people who speak different dialects may not even be able to communicate verbally. I believe the biggest difference between Chinese and English lies in their way of thinking. It's not so much about learning new knowledge, but rather adjusting the way we combine existing knowledge. Following this direction, I researched a lot and found that the underlying logic of Chinese is very simple and can even be summarized in a few sentences. Additionally, I discovered that this underlying logic is very similar to playing RPG games. If Chinese were an RPG game, it would have the following settings. First is the first-person perspective. The player is always in the first-person perspective, which corresponds to the subjectivity of the Chinese language. I will explain this in detail later. Second is the experience system. Accumulating experience in one skill can easily be transferred to another skill, meaning experience is equivalent. Finally, you can create your own tools and weapons. Once you are familiar with the characteristics of various resources in the game, you can combine them to create game items. Alright, let's start the game. Let's look at 3 common scenarios in daily life: greeting a friend, making a phone call, and hailing a taxi. The direct translation of a Chinese expression into English could be hit a greeting, hit a phone call, and hit taxi. Because these actions all involve our movements. This sounds very strange. Let's see what we would do in a game if we encounter similar situations. In a game, if you want to talk to an NPC, you get close and press the button A on the controller. Of course, there are no phones in games, but if we want to pick up an item, we'd also get close and press A. Did you notice the logic of Chinese expression is exactly the same as the logic of controlling a game? Every action is issued from a first-person perspective. Chinese is highly subjective. As long as you think an action is reasonable, it generally makes sense in Chinese. For example, greeting someone from a first-person perspective means waving your arm. At the same time, Chinese also has equivalents. If two actions look the same, then their expressions are similar. For example, in Chinese, sneeze literally translates to hit a sneeze. Doesn't this sound a bit strange? Sneezing doesn't involve the hands, so why is it called hit? Because when you sneeze, your body shakes violently, looking as if someone has punched you in the back. So you can use the verb hit. Let's look at another example. The phrase disturb in Chinese can be literally translated to hit and interrupting. This is very interesting because in this example, there is neither a hand movement nor a body shake involved. So, why can it also be called hit? You can imagine a scene where the people are chatting, and a speech bubble appears between them, just like what we see in comic books. If the speech bubble is disrupted by someone, it means the conversation is interrupted. What would you use to disrupt the speech bubble? Of course, it would be your hand. So, as long as you have the intention to wave your arm to disrupt something, you can use the verb hit. After the brainstorming session, I think you are already somewhat accustomed to the thinking style of Chinese. Now let's look at another verb eat. First, you can of course eat pizza. This is quite normal in all languages. Then, when you are sick, you might take medicine. Although eat medicine sounds a bit awkward, it is still acceptable. Lastly, there is eat surprise. You might wonder, surprise is just a concept and has no physical form, so why can it be eaten? Let me explain. Recall the body's reaction when you are surprised. You will involuntarily open your mouth and inhale. Now recall the body's reaction when you eat. You open your mouth and swallow. Have you found the similarity in all these actions? First, you open your mouth, then something enters your body through your mouth. So, as long as it looks like you are eating something, you can use the verb eat. In Chinese, almost all verbs can be explained using subjectivity and equivalence. Subjectivity means observing the world from your own perspective, putting your own feelings first. Equivalence means that if the results of two things look the same, then I can use the same way to express them. You will find that the use of verbs in Chinese is very similar to the buttons on a game controller. When playing a game, if you can skillfully operate the controller, you can control the game character. In reality, when you are familiar with all the verbs related to the body, you have mastered Chinese. Of course, there are also some verbs in Chinese that are not related to the human body. However, because Chinese is a highly subjective language, verbs related to the body occupy a large proportion. If Chinese were a game, so far we have talked a lot about its basic operations. Next, let's take a look at the world structure of this game. First is the issue of tense. In English, there are various tenses, but in Chinese, there are none. So, how does it express the past and the future? Imagine this scenario. When you watch the news, you will find that reporters always report the time when the news happened first, and then they start reporting the news content. Because if you don't know when the news happened, you won't know whether it is a live broadcast or a replay. Chinese handles tenses in the same way as news reporting. When a change in tense is needed, the time is stated first, followed by a general present tense statement. It must be said, Chinese handles tenses with the utmost simplicity. Next, let's look at the vocabulary of Chinese. There are tens of thousands of words in Chinese. Is there any internal pattern to their composition? Fortunately, yes, complex things are usually composed of simple rules. Let's start with daily life. First, let's look at the 7 days of the week in Chinese, which can be literally translated into English as day 1, day 2, until Sunday, which is not day 7 but Sunday. Then, let's see how Chinese expresses time within a day. Chinese divides a day into 12 periods, each equivalent to 2 hours. Here is the correspondence between periods and hours. You will find that each period in Chinese has its own name, just like each month has its own name in English. So, why does only Sunday have its own name among the 7 days of the week? While each period has its own name, the reason is that Chinese only invents new words in special situations. So the question arises, what counts as a special situation and what is the standard? Chinese determines whether something is special based on two assumptions. First, you should assume you are an ordinary person with common sense and little to no specialized knowledge. Second, this specialness should be easily noticeable. You do not need reasoning at all. Still confused, let me put it another way. Suppose I have the ability to travel through time and I can take you to any day in history. To prevent widely known disasters, when we arrive at our destination, we cannot talk to the locals or bring any high-tech devices. After traveling through time, you tried to answer a few questions. Can you determine what day of the week it is today? I think this is basically impossible because every day looks the same. So, can you determine whether today is Sunday? I think this can be done because people go to church on Sundays and you can know by checking if there is a worship service at the church. Finally, can you determine what time it is now? I think this can also be done. By observing the position of the sun and the moon and combining it with the ambient temperature, we can easily estimate the current time, although it might not be very precise. Do you understand? In Chinese, what is considered special can be easily noticed by ordinary people. Among the 7 days of the week, we can easily distinguish Sunday, so it is special. This also explains why a day is divided into 12 periods, because ordinary people's estimation of time is not that precise. Let's look at another example. In both Chinese and English, the first child has a special title. In English, it's called firstborn. In Chinese, it's called eldest son. The subsequent children are referred to as the second son, the third son, and so on. Applying the above rule, we can easily infer why the eldest son has a special designation. This is because the eldest son inherits the property. And moreover, the birth of the eldest son ensures the continuation of the family to the next generation. This can be summed up by Akon's famous saying, "Entities should not be multiplied unnecessarily." Let's look at a counterexample. Most Chinese vocabulary is composed of more basic words. For example, all types of meat are named by adding meat to the name of the animal. Like fish meat, chicken meat, beef is called cow meat, and lamb is called sheep meat. Why doesn't Chinese invent new words for certain types of meat? According to the above rules, it can be explained as follows. First, all these meats are food, and your body's reaction after eating them is the same. Second, if you put different kinds of meat together, it may be difficult to distinguish them just by observation, especially when they are cooked. You might say that the texture of these meats is different, and texture goes beyond simple observation. If you observe closely enough, everything is unique, which is clearly not the style of Chinese. Finally, let's talk about another way Chinese compound words are formed, which is derivation. Understanding derived words requires some imagination. Chinese people believe that consciousness resides in the heart, and that emotional changes also originate from the heart in the Chinese way of thinking. You can imagine the heart as a house where consciousness lives. If you feel the house shaking, it means strong emotional fluctuations, such as falling in love with someone. If the house is damaged, it means your mood is low, that is, sadness. If you open the window to ventilate the room, the direct translation in Chinese is open heart, which means you are very happy. When you cheer, your arms are open, which is similar to the Chinese expression for happiness. If you have a hero's heart, it means you are very ambitious. This is my first video on learning Chinese. I want to share as much valuable content as possible, rather than just some vocabulary memory techniques. For this, I did a lot of research, but somewhat dramatically, many concepts are difficult to express in English due to cultural differences. When I discovered that playing games can introduce the features of Chinese appropriately, I was overjoyed. I quickly reorganized the materials around this idea and then came up with this video. If you find this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Remember to turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any updates.